Bruce Lee didn't say goodbye the way people expect legends to. There was no dramatic monologue, no final bow, just a quiet glance, a simple warning, and a man carrying the weight of something he hadn't yet said out loud. And Chuck Norris? He still thinks about that moment, that final exchange, the look in Bruce's eyes, the tone in his voice, the feeling that maybe, just maybe, Bruce knew what was coming, and said the one thing that still haunts Chuck to this day. I should have stopped him. This isn't a story about a fight. It's about what happened in the silence after the fight. The words never spoken, the warning signs missed, and the one conversation Chuck Norris still replays in his head more than 50 years later. Because before the curtain closed on Bruce Lee's life, he said something to Chuck Norris that's never been forgotten and never fully explained. To the public, they were icons of strength, the unstoppable Bruce Lee and the unshakable Chuck Norris. But behind the camera, behind the fame, they were something far more interesting. Two men bound not by rivalry, but by a shared obsession. Perfection. Bruce wasn't like the other martial artists Chuck had met in tournaments. He was faster, yes, more explosive, but it wasn't just the physicality, it was the way Bruce thought. Every movement had a philosophy behind it. Every jab carried meaning. Every silence, a lesson. Chuck Norris, on the other hand, was a man of form and discipline. A 5-time world karate champion, he built his career on precision, structure, and repetition. Where Bruce flowed like water, Chuck struck like stone. And yet, they connected. Their first meeting wasn't staged. It wasn't a media moment. It was in a small martial arts gathering in California, long before Hollywood knew either of their names. Bruce watched Chuck spar, quietly nodding. Chuck studied Bruce's speed, trying to decode the rhythm. There was no challenge, no need for posturing, just mutual admiration, and a silent agreement that they had something to learn from each other. Over time, that respect deepened. They trained together occasionally, not often, but enough. Bruce would question Chuck's rigidity. Chuck would challenge Bruce's improvisation. They pushed each other, not to win, but to grow. The world thought they were enemies, but the truth? They were both watching the same storm, just from different angles. And then came the invitation, the call that would immortalize them both. Chuck, I want you in my next film. Bruce was planning a cinematic fight that would outlive them both. A battle not just of strength, but of philosophy. And he wanted Chuck in the ring. Chuck said yes. Of course he did. But what he didn't realize, what no one realized, was that this wouldn't just be Bruce's next movie. It would be his last. The Roman Colosseum had seen its share of blood. Lions, gladiators, kings. But in 1972, it hosted something different. A quiet showdown between two modern warriors, filmed under the blistering sun for Way of the Dragon. To the casual viewer, it's just a fight scene. Brilliantly shot, yes. Iconic, but still a fight scene. To Chuck, it was a message, a manifesto, a moment where Bruce poured everything he believed into every single frame. Bruce choreographed the fight himself. He was obsessive about the details, where the camera moved, how long each blow lasted, when the fighters should show fatigue. He told Chuck, "We're not just showing a fight. We're telling a story of respect, of struggle, of adaptation." And Chuck understood. He trusted Bruce's vision, even when it felt uncomfortable. He let go of his own techniques, adjusted his stances, followed Bruce's lead. What people don't know is that Bruce wanted the fight to feel real. Not staged, not flashy, real. There were moments during filming where Chuck wondered if Bruce had forgotten it was just choreography. He was in another place, Chuck would later say. You could feel it. He was carrying something. At one point during shooting, Bruce snapped. Not violently, emotionally. He walked off set, pacing, silent, distant. When Chuck approached him, Bruce just shook his head and said, "I'm not sleeping, man. I'm not resting. There's too much to do." Chuck thought it was just pressure, standard movie stress, the budget, the time, the perfectionism. But Bruce looked different. His body was leaner, his eyes darker. He was pushing himself in ways Chuck hadn't seen before. And during one break in filming, something strange happened. Bruce leaned in, quietly, and said, "They don't want to let me finish this. They think it's too much. Too Chinese. Too real." Chuck didn't know who they were. Producers? Distributors? Censors? He didn't ask. Bruce didn't explain. But that's when Chuck saw it, just for a moment, the fear behind the fire. The man behind the myth. "I'm going to finish it anyway," Bruce said. "Even if it kills me." And then he laughed. Chuck laughed too, nervously. Because in that moment, something in Bruce's voice didn't sound like a joke. It sounded like a warning. And that was the moment Chuck would carry with him for the rest of his life. Not just the fight choreography, not just the applause, but that single quiet confession. "Even if it kills me." He said it with a smirk. But Chuck saw the truth in his eyes. He was already burning out, already fading. And Chuck? He ignored it. Because what could he say? Bruce Lee was unstoppable. Right? Right? There's a strange moment that happens when you're around someone burning too bright. You think it's light. You think it's brilliance. You think it's what makes them who they are. But sometimes, it's a warning. After Way of the Dragon wrapped, Chuck didn't see Bruce right away. They were both busy. Chuck was deep in the competitive circuit. Bruce was promoting the film, building momentum for what would become Enter the Dragon. They exchanged a few calls. Short, upbeat, rushed. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, not yet. But months later, they crossed paths again. No cameras. No crowd. Just two old friends having tea in a quiet room in Hong Kong. And this time, Bruce wasn't on. He looked thinner. Still sharp, still confident. But something was different. The spark was still there, but the fire was dimmer. His voice was slower, his movements more deliberate. He wasn't complaining, but Chuck noticed it. He asked if Bruce was okay. Bruce smiled half-heartedly. Then he leaned in and said, "I can't stop. If I slow down, it catches up to me." Chuck didn't understand what it was. Stress? Fear? Time? Bruce didn't elaborate. He just stared out the window for a few seconds. Not lost, but measuring something. "They're trying to control what I say, what I show, who I am." Chuck shrugged it off at the time. He figured Bruce was just venting about producers or studios. But then Bruce looked him in the eye and said something that would echo in Chuck's mind for the next 50 years. "Promise me you won't let them cage you." It didn't feel like advice. It felt like a man handing over a torch. Because he knew he wasn't going to carry it much longer. And Chuck, focused on the conversation, not the subtext, simply nodded. "Of course," he said. "You're just tired." Bruce didn't argue. He just smiled. Chuck didn't know it yet. But that was the last time he'd ever speak to Bruce Lee. Chuck still remembers how it ended. No dramatic hug. No long farewell. Just Bruce, standing by the door, about to leave. He paused, turned slightly, looked over his shoulder, and said, "Take care of your body. You don't get a second one." It was classic Bruce, part wisdom, part warning. Chuck smiled and nodded, thinking it was just a friendly reminder from a guy who trained like a maniac. But the tone was different. There was something final about it. As if Bruce wasn't just talking about health, he was saying something deeper. Something Chuck didn't fully hear until it was too late. And then Bruce was gone. Chuck watched him walk away, never knowing it would be the last time he'd ever see him in the flesh. In the weeks that followed, Chuck went back to work. The tournaments, the schools, the film opportunities that were now opening faster than ever before. Bruce, meanwhile, was fighting battles no one could see. Headaches, fainting spells, studio pressure, health problems that confused even the doctors around him. The public saw a man at the height of his power. Chuck saw a man in freefall, only in hindsight. And then the phone rang. July 20th, 1973. Chuck Norris was in the middle of a karate seminar in California. Hot gym, packed crowd, students hanging on his every move. Then someone from the front desk interrupted, holding a note with shaking hands. Bruce Lee was dead. Chuck didn't believe it, couldn't. He thought it was a mistake, a rumor. But as the words were repeated over and over again, the reality hit like a punch he couldn't block. Gone. At 32, Just weeks before Enter the Dragon would release. Just days after they'd spoken. Chuck stepped outside the gym, stood in silence. The sounds of the crowd behind him faded, replaced by a high-pitched ringing in his ears. And then, like a dam breaking, it hit him. That conversation. I can't stop. If I slow down, it catches up to me. They're trying to cage me. Promise me. All of it rushed back, too fast to make sense of. Why hadn't he said something? Pushed harder? Asked more questions? He had sensed it, felt something was off, and he said nothing. He let Bruce walk away. He let him carry that weight alone. I should have stopped him. That phrase, that guilt, would become the shadow Chuck carried into every dojo, every movie set, every interview. Because Chuck wasn't just mourning a friend. He was mourning a moment. The one where he might have made a difference and didn't. He knew Bruce was under pressure. He saw the signs. He heard the weariness. But he never asked the question that mattered. Are you okay? Really? And Bruce never volunteered the truth. Two warriors. Two men who prided themselves on knowing how to read an opponent. And yet neither of them could see what was coming. Chuck never went public with the full conversation. Not until years later. Not until the documentaries started. The retrospectives. The tributes. And even then, he kept some of it private. It was ours, he once said. That moment. Just his and mine. But what he did share was clear. Bruce was fighting more than the industry. He was fighting the idea that he had to be invincible. That he had to be the dragon every hour of every day. And Chuck? He was the one-man Bruce let the mask slip for. Even if it was only for a moment. Even if it was too late. In the years that followed Bruce Lee's death, Chuck Norris became a global icon. Movies, books, memes, martial arts schools. He was celebrated for his strength, his discipline, his control. But behind all of it was a quiet ache. Chuck rarely spoke about Bruce publicly in the early years. It wasn't avoidance, it was reverence. He knew that anything he said could be twisted, misquoted, turned into fanboy folklore. But when he did speak, it was always the same tone. Measured, mournful, and deeply respectful. He was ahead of all of us, Chuck said once. Not just physically, mentally, philosophically. Bruce wasn't just trying to fight. He was trying to free people. Free them from systems, from outdated traditions, from themselves. But Bruce didn't have someone to do that for him. He was the one man breaking walls, and yet no one broke them for him. That's the part that stays with Chuck. Not the loss, not the funeral, but the realization that Bruce, for all his brilliance, was alone in his final moments. I should have said something, Chuck has admitted. I should have told him to stop, to take a break, to rest. But he didn't, because to Chuck, and to the rest of the world, Bruce Lee seemed immortal. And maybe that's the tragedy. Not that he died young, but that no one ever told him he was allowed to slow down. Today, when Chuck Norris speaks about Bruce Lee, it's not with the language of fandom or legend. It's with the voice of someone who carries a weight. Not because of something he did, but because of what he didn't do. He didn't ask the hard question. He didn't challenge the mask. He didn't stop him. He didn't ask for help, Chuck says. But maybe, deep down, he hoped someone would offer it. And in that single line, we find the real story. Not just of Bruce Lee's death, but of his life. Of the quiet pressure to always perform, to always deliver, to always be more than human. Bruce Lee's greatest strength wasn't his speed, or his technique, or his power. It was his willingness to question everything, except perhaps the cost of being the legend everyone wanted him to be. And Chuck Norris? He's still carrying Bruce's final message. Not just the words, but the silence that followed them. Promise me you won't let them cage you. Chuck didn't understand it then, but he does now. And through every interview, every tribute, every memory, he's been keeping that promise the only way he knows how, by telling the story, not the myth, but the man, the one who stood at the door, looked back one last time, and said what might have been a goodbye. For more of the latest news, check out this video.